Shirley Adams for the Sewing Connection, Series 15, Program 2. There is the most beautiful spot in Birmingham, Alabama. The building where I had an appointment with the book publisher is high on a hill nestled into a little ravine with the stream running right through the spacious glassed-in entry. On the way out, I paused to admire a gorgeous rug. It was a work of art, all sculptured with tunnels and tubes intertwined in this vast space. Well, I stood there for a minute and looked, and then I immediately forgot about it when we left, until my return months later. Well, in the meantime, between the two trips there, I had made this jacket, and it just came to me one day as I had a little problem having enough space on the fabric. This idea just flashed into my mind, and I had no idea how I suddenly dreamed it up until several months later when I went back to that building, and I walked in the front door and I stopped dead in my tracks because there it was, the rug, my jacket, identical. I had no idea that I was doing the very same thing. Your mind plays these funny little games with you, and you store facts and things that you notice without even realizing it. Well, anyway, how this came about is I started in my usual way with just a basic pattern. Now this one I'm wearing you've seen me make probably 20 times, just a big oversized jacket. And it came from the patterner, just making it so it is a little bit bigger. And because it has completely straight lines on it, there was no reason to actually have a seam if I could eliminate it. And the reason I wanted to eliminate that seam is because my body is just a speck wider than that fabric was, and I had a couple of buttons that really went well, and I wanted to use them, so I needed an overlap there for those buttons. Therefore, what I did was overlap the pattern pieces. And this, if I just overlap it because of those straight lines, because there is no shape, I can just put it one piece over the other so that the stitching lines coincide. And then I had just enough that it would go around me and come up to the center front. That still wasn't quite enough. Well, below that I laid my sleeve, and then right next to my sleeve there was an empty spot where I had some extra fabric. Not very big, but an extra panel that I could do something with. And so what I did with that is, first of all, just play with a piece of paper or some of this pattern tracer until I could get something going here that was big enough that would provide that extra. So here you can see how I've added it from the original jacket, which is just a V-neck that comes up here. Then I added this to the right side only. It's not on the left side because I didn't have that much fabric. I had to just keep it on the right. So the front of the right and the left are a little bit different, and that's fine. There's no reason why they have to be the same. Well, this is the pattern for it then. So what I did was just put this little pattern that I made that fit in paper, that fit on this, and I wanted to draw some of these lines because if you just add that piece here, it's going to look like you've tacked something on. You need to do something elaborate with it so it looks like it was meant to be, so that it looks like it belongs. And so from the scrap of fabric I had left, I decided I'm just going to draw some tubes and tunnels. And I didn't cut it out originally because you don't know how much room you're going to need. It's going to take up some space to work in all those tunnels. Therefore, I just made sure I had a big enough piece here, which fine, I could play with it a little bit and there'd still be plenty of space there. So then it was just drawing some wavy lines. Now, you don't have to be an artist to do this. Anybody can draw a wavy line. So you can see here on my front, I have a combination of tunnels and tubes. Now, where the tunnels are, here's the fabric, and here's another one, and here's one. I only have, I guess, about 3 or 4 of these tunnels that were made all in one piece with the original fabric. And that's about all. Then I have on top of that some tubes that are made out of a completely different fabric that I was just lucky enough to find in my stash that matched exactly. And so those tubes are separate and stitched on later. So just a little wavy line here and there. This may not look like the one on my suit, but I can't see my suit too well. So I might have had a line there, and maybe another line here, and maybe another one about here. And after I had just some chalk lines drawn, then it's going to the machine and stitching those in. And then because you don't want them to go flat, you want them to stay padded out, you better pad it with something, in my case a little bit of yarn. And so this is just going to be a straight stitch, and you could probably do this without the lines, but it's easier if you add the lines for yourself so you know where you're going, so you have some sort of general area where you're going to do this. Now also it's a good idea if this piece is interfaced first, as you would with the front of a jacket. It would be a little heavier with interfacing in it. And as I do this stitching, I just want to do narrow tubes. How wide they are doesn't really matter. In fact, if you want, they can get wider and narrower, and that'd be all right too. You're just doing something a little interesting. So what foot I need, I don't quite know. I think I'll just use a standard one and see what happens there. Now the other choices might be, especially if you already had something padded there, you might find that it would be more helpful to have a piping foot. That would be good because it has a groove under it and it would permit that extra heaviness, whatever you are using for piping, that groove that's under the foot would allow that to go through. But I'm not going to put that in until after I do the stitching. Therefore, I really didn't need it at this point. I might for some other things later. Or another thought would be a zipper foot. And again, if you already had some piping there and some welting, and we're just trying to get up close to it as you stitched, that might be helpful. But for my purposes, just a plain standard multi-purpose foot will do the job. And so I'm going to start out like this. And it would also be helpful when I start stitching, if I might want to not go way out to the edge, I might want to just start all of a sudden here and have it start at a point and then taper into something a little fatter on up the line. So I'm going to start here at a point and work away from it. And I have a zigzag stitch I see right now on my machine, and I really don't want that. I want just a straight stitch, so I'll move it over. And then I'm going to start stitching. Now generally, when this is going to be on the outside, even though I would like to simply backstitch, it very well could be that a backstitch would show, and I don't want that to happen. Therefore, I'll just start stitching, leave it alone, pull those thread ends through to the back side later and tie a knot, and it's going to look better that way. So we'll go ahead and stitch, and when I get up here a little ways, suddenly this tube starts to change direction, and I have a bit of a problem there. So what I want to do is stitch with the needle down position, so that when I come to a spot where I need to shift it a little bit, I can always just raise the presser foot up, and I'm going to use the knee lift here just so that I can keep both my hands here to shuffle my fabric around and be lifting the presser foot with my knee, and at the same time the needle's holding the fabric in place, so it won't be a problem. But as I have it lifted here, I will then refold it so that I bring my chalk line right out to the edge every time. And when I get up to where I can no longer stitch along that, then I'll do the same thing. Raise the presser foot with my knee lift and shift it a little bit more and stitch on again. This is really handy. I was very happy when they put these knee lifts on because it does help in so many instances. Okay, and shift it again. And so you can see it's really easy. If you just stop every few stitches, it's really easy to change your fabric and make it curve back and forth and do something rather pretty like this. Now this is a silk that I'm working on, and there are all sorts of silks. Some of them are the thinner blouse silks. This is just a heavy suit weight silk. And what I love about working with silk as I do a suit like this is the fact that, where will I take this one? Right down the center, I guess, is the fact that it's very easy to work with, it's easy to sew, it's easy to press, and this one meets a little resistance. You can hear the needle clunk slightly on it every time it hits, and that's because right now there is a very definite finish on. This fabric at that point hadn't been cleaned, and so it's kind of hitting the finish on the fabric, really. Okay, well, shift it a little more here. And again a little bit. And this is just chalk dust that I have on here, of course. And so when I get finished, if I didn't completely follow that line, it isn't going to make a bit of difference. It won't be seen. It'll just brush off. So it's quite all right. It was just a general guideline, so I know approximately what I want to do. And then I'd go ahead and do those others also, and do as many more as I felt would be appropriate. But you can see when I open this up that this is just a curvy line here, And it's going to look a lot nicer once it is padded, because right now it comes to a sharp edge there, and this is the same thing that could happen when you press it, of course. So I want to pad it so that it's rounded instead of like that. The way I'm going to pad this is just with some yarn and a tapestry needle so that I can go through that channel and get that extra bulk inside. And to get this padding done, it's just starting here, and you go as far as you can. And once you get that far, then pull it along here. And if you make real small tubes, it's going to be harder to pull. Once I get it started, it'll be easier, and there I've got it started. So it's just pulling it every once in a while, and I'll do it this way, and just keep pulling that up. So you can see it's a pretty easy job, but once you get this corded, it's going to look so much nicer. It just really gives it there. I'll just do about that much, but it just gives it a really nice look. You can see how much better this looks than it does before it was corded. And of course, with this yarn inside, now I can just take it to the ironing board and press it if I want to, and nothing dreadful is going to happen. It can't flatten anymore. And this is especially good to press if you put the wrong side down with a terry towel on the ironing board, so that it sort of dents into that terry towel, into the thickness of it, and then especially it won't push flat, so it looks very nice. Now I have a feeling that I used more than just the two thicknesses when I did this suit that I'm wearing, because those tunnels are a little bit fatter. After I got finished with all this, then it was putting that little pattern on top that I had made and cutting it out, because by now I have it as small as I'm going to. It's all condensed by the time I would sew several more of these tubes, and so I no longer need to worry about, is it going to be big enough? It's time then to go ahead and cut it out and finish up the suit. And after I had it all sewn on, then I added those extra tubes, and I have no more of that fabric. I used every bit, but here's the idea. Here was the edge of the suit jacket somewhere up here, and I used then these tubes to just intertwine in and out and do something interesting with them. And they crossed back and forth. I needed a buttonhole up here at the top, so there had to be one of those tubes coming up here for a buttonhole. And it would be nice if you could stitch all this on by machine, but it isn't too likely you're going to do that without any threads showing. And so this is bite the bullet time, and you have to do some of this by hand. But you can see how easy this is. Just put a pin here and there wherever you need it. You would, of course, begin and end it at the outside edge so that you wouldn't be able to see where that beginning is. And just make sure that when you pin this down, that you have left enough room so that your button actually will go through this space. Don't make it too big or it'll fall open when you move around in the coat. You want it so it's just the right size, but then move that tube in and out. So I did a couple of those. Just do some pretty things there and see what comes of it. And then after I got through with this, it occurred to me that, well, you know, I would really like to have a pocket on this also. Therefore, I added the pocket later. I still had more scraps, and so that pocket was put down here on the jacket. Not two pockets, only one. And with that pocket, set at just the right angle so I could get my hand in it easily. So it's about like this probably. But I thought that pocket looks also separate out here, that I better do something to join them, because I'm not going to put a pocket on this side. Now this is so far out. To put two pockets this far out is going to make you look hippier. That's why I just put one, because it kind of fools the eye if it's off-center this way, and you can't tell how wide I really am. So this makes it look a little bit better. But I wanted to join it. It looked kind of lonesome out here all by itself, and this is why I put a few more tubes so that it would come join, not only have the tubes down the front, but also come around here, the tunnels, the tubes. These were so that a few of those are here, so it looks like all one unit putting it together. So this kind of evolved. I had no idea when I was first starting exactly what would happen. I just thought, oh, I am being so original, I'm making something very unique, until I then later saw that I had just unconsciously or subconsciously copied what I had seen there. I'd like to show you here on some models, and then on the table some other samples, other tubes that people have used. And the first one is Sally Crane, who has made this gorgeous white mohair coat. And she's from Lake St. Louis, Missouri. And notice how she not only has a lot of channel quilting done around the front of the coat and around the bottom, But look at those big tubes that she has used and intertwined several of them, all to use as a fastening for that button up at the neck. But isn't that a pretty idea? It's a neat way to go, and it's a good way to go if you have a coat that's open and you decide, you know, I'd really like to have a fastening there. So this is always something you can add as an afterthought if you just have a little scrap of the fabric left to tie it all in. And then we have 3 vests there that are by Lois Erickson, and she's from Salem, Oregon. You've probably heard her name before on one of my shows because she is just a wonderfully innovative person. Everything she makes is just gorgeous. She lectures and she writes books, and this one is using some tubes also. Notice how she just has a big strip down the center where she has a couple of tubes. They're sewn together in between the buttons, but they are just 2 separate tubes that were stitched together by hand later, and these are used as a closing. Then here's a really neat one, and this one is just great fabric all by itself. But look what she has done with some tubes. She has used that tube as a partial belt that comes from the side and intertwines with a piece of driftwood. It looks like it's a flying goose or something there, but actually it's a piece of driftwood that just happened to have a nice little burl in the wood that she could use as a fastener to tie that tube through. This is what I mean when I say this lady is very ingenious, very inventive. Then there's another vest there also by Lois, and this vest has some tubes used also. Now these were little tubes that were loose, and she's put them around the neck and then also used some to fasten buttons. Maybe those buttons don't even function, maybe they're just there, and then again one of them does function because the tube makes a buttonhole there. Well, pretty things. I'd like you to look down at the table now and see some more of her things that aren't even finished pieces, or aren't even finished garments. They're just samples. And sometimes she likes to make samples like this so that she can see what's going to happen. And also, this is a preview of her newest book because these samples were photographed to go in the book. Let me start down here and show you. Now, one of those vests was this. It was the 2 tubes, and then they just split wherever the opening needs to be for buttons to come through. Here are tunnels and channels and all kinds of neat things, a tube around the outside of it. And again, just neat shapes that are faced. There is a different fabric on the wrong side of them. They're faced, and it just makes a really interesting thing. You can't look at Lois in anything that she's wearing and just look in her eye as you ordinarily would with a person. You have to look at her clothes because they are always so very, very interesting. Here's another one I absolutely love, and this is out of the fabric that you saw on the model, or a little scrap of it left. If you have a little scrap of something, put it to good use. Use it as she has done here with some contrasting fabric, the black, because there was just a little bit of black in the fabric. So this might be on a black jacket, just with this little bit of front. Think of this, by the way, for an idea in case you have a jacket that no longer fits you quite right, in case it's now a little bit tight. How about just adding something like this to it? And isn't that pretty, the way this one goes around here, and these tubes go around here, and they form the button loop then so that it all fastens and it intertwines before it fastens. So isn't this a great idea? And something I have a feeling will stick in your mind until you get that made also on some project of yours. Another one here uses a tube that just goes round and round in a lot of curlicues, but here they're used as button loops on this side of it. So some of them are useful. Some of them are just decorative and don't mean anything at all, except isn't that pretty? It's decorative there, so this is what it means. Here's another one with big buttonholes, and there are tunnels in here because they're all faced, and it looks like it's loose, even though it isn't. It's stitched back there, but it's stitched sort of from underneath so that it does give that extra dimension there, as though it's burrowing in tunnels, and it looks really pretty that way. Notice as I unbutton one of these, that it's a couple of big wide tubes that she has there for the button lips, and then they're just split so that there's room for it to button. Another tunnel and tube idea down here is where this one is also just a great big tunnel, a big opening here, and you can see when I open it that there's another tube underneath that's flattened out. And isn't that another innovative idea? Here she has a ribbon used instead of a tube that goes down the front, and it just miters at each corner as it goes around here and there. For all of you who have run short of fabric, these are all wonderful ideas to do something very innovative in the front and extend that fabric beyond what you thought you had, because mixing fabrics is something we see right now, whether it's commercial, whether it's something that's ready to wear that you've bought, or whether it's something you make yourself. You don't have to follow a pattern exactly. You can add these innovative touches to make it very uniquely yours and to make it just wonderful. Here are some more tubes over here and a great button. This is also a piece of wood that's highly polished, and that wood has big holes drilled in it, and so one tube goes through to sew the button on, and then the other fatter tube is a button loop here, and it all just goes through there very nicely, and that's a nice use also for some tubes. Down here we have something similar in the tubes again. This also, they're button loops, and when this is open, look at the front of this jacket or vest or dress or whatever the garment might be, how it goes in and out. And so all these ideas I hope you're storing in your mind so that you can recollect them later and perhaps do something that duplicates these. Here's another one down here with tubes. And this tube is a kind of a fat tube. See how it's crushed? And what she has done with this is just tie it in a big knot, and that opening here is just big enough for that button. But there isn't really an opening here on the garment. Maybe it zips up the back or something. This is just a little fun thing. There's big button. They're almost touching, but they aren't really even intended to function, to work. The same thing is over here. This one does work. It is two pieces. But see how she has various tunnels there before you actually get to the edge of the fabric. Just add on pieces, and then she has a leather knot there out of that tube to make it button. Here's some other that's really pretty, some thin silk and some really pretty silk. It almost looks like something that you could find in an upholstery or a drapery department. Very, very pretty. At first when I saw this I thought, oh, has she pieced this? Has she put something down? But no, that's all in this jacquard weave that's here, and it's just very pretty. And then it cuts off here with those lines going another direction. But isn't that gorgeous with the beads added? And if you have one of these beads with a big hole, it's a donut-shaped bead, if you have one of those that you wondered what to do with it, here's what you do with it. You just hook several tubes to it, and that works very nicely as another fastening. Or here we have beads that are strung on this tube that's here. And the tube is fat enough that those beads don't move. They stay right in place as they were pulled up there. And anyway, isn't that pretty, all of it? Here's another tube that goes around, a metal tube, and then it was flattened probably with a hammer, a pair of pliers, something, so that it would hold in place here very well. And if you can't remember all these wonderful ideas, here's Lois's book. You can remember that. It's newly on the market and probably found in most bookshops, but it's very interesting. Now, not only is this by Lois, by the way, but Ann Charles did this with her. It was a collaboration. The two people did this together. Now, I have some more tubes in the back of this jacket here, this vest that's on the mannequin. And those, you know, I said tubes you can't really sew in very easily by machine, and this is why I sewed all of my tubes here on the front, the extra fabric that I added. I sewed them by hand because there's no way to do it. Well, here I've done it. I don't know that I'll have time to show you how. Maybe I can. Maybe I can show you. I'll do it a little bit more extensively later, but if I can just grab a little piece of piping here, maybe I can show you how that's done. Here's a piece of piping, and we'll just bring it back here to show you. Okay, what I've done there is make another tunnel and put the tube right in it. And so what I did with this piping is first of all cut it down. I wanted to get rid of as much extra here as I possibly could so that it would be a very skinny little seam allowance on it. And then as I did the stitching, I simply enclosed it between layers. And so it is all stitched on by machine, and all you can see is the tube, and yet there was no hand stitching done here. It was done strictly by machine. Now, I must admit, by the time I did that, there was enough work involved that it might have been just as quick to do it by hand, but I did not do it by hand. I want to very quickly just show you 3 more models who are wearing tubes, and then I'll probably explain in another show how this is being done. The first one is a flower jacket, and actually that's mine. I'll wear it sometime down the line and you can see. But notice that double piping that's around the edge of it. Well, these are tubes, and this makes a little interesting look. The next one also has some double piping, and the next one is by Jean Montgomery of Temple City, California. Isn't this a gorgeous jacket that she has? And every place where, or several places where she connected various fabric strips, she has put some double tubes in. And then the last one there by June Grieg is on the inside, actually. This is where the lining and the facing meet, that she has done a couple of double tubes there. And so there are a lot of uses for tubes and tunnels, but just let your mind have free rein. Let it imagine something very nice and then find a way to recreate it in fabric. Let's travel north next time. We're going to stop in New York for a reality check in I Grew. You going to sew? Join me there.